Okay, so what we covered yesterday is we wanted to know where we ended off. And how we said is that it's been said that Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, the halacha is in accordance with Rav Yossi. So let me just tell you what Rav Yossi's opinion is. Um, Rav Yossi said, listen, I understand with regards to a capital case why you have a invalid witness disregarding the rest of the witness's testimony, because in a capital case we want to get the defendant off the death penalty. But in a monetary case, if you've got three witnesses and one is basically discredited because they have a biases that they're relative to one of the principals or one of the other witnesses, or perhaps they a habitual sinner, or we don't trust them because they're a professional gambler, then let's disqualify that particular witness. And if there are halachically two remaining witnesses, it suffices for a monetary case. Okay. So that was the opinion of Rav Yehuda, who said in the name of Shmuel. We go with Rav Yossi. Rav Nachman said the halacha is in accordance with Rebbe, Rav Yehuda Nasi. So what does Rebbe say? Well, Rebbe says, guys, as you know, that there has to be a qualification. And he said it doesn't matter whether it's a monetary case or a capital case. If there's a disqualification of a single witness, it invalidates the testimony of the entire group. But only when, in a capital case, the witness participated in the warning against the murderer, or in a monetary case when the Beis Din Sanhedrin asks him, do you wish to participate in this court trial, or were you merely a spectator? He has to answer that he's prepared to participate. And after that fact, if they find something that discredits him, they will indeed disqualify the remainder of the witnesses being a single group. And we also said that what they do as a precautionary measure is they join all the witnesses in the timeline of a brief statement. So you can't have 100 witnesses in the time it says, greetings and peace be upon you, my master and teacher. What we are saying is by the time the witness finishes, the next witness has to start. Almost, it's a continuous form of a single testimony, even though there are multiple witnesses. And why do you want to bind them? Is that it provides mercy to the group if one of the witnesses is not a disqualified witness, or is not an well, if one of them is a disqualified witness, it disqualifies the entire group. Okay, which means that the murderer is not killed directly by the Sanhedrin, because we want to try and see if they're extenuating circumstances. In regard to Adam Zomimim, the reason being is that it joins their testimony. So if one of the witnesses can't be accounted for by the second set of witnesses, that he was with the remainder of the witnesses in a different location at the time that they viewed the crime, then him being exonerated and not being a conspiring witness invalidates the reciprocal penalty placed on all of them, but the case is dismissed against the defendant. The question is, why would you want to get murderers off? And is that the healthy thing to do? That's going to be discussed in the next two duffs. As what exactly is the balance and what exactly is the point if you're going to give them the barley treatment, and what circumstance that applies. Okay, so I think probably the halacha by most of us would go with Rav Yehuda Hanossi, simply saying that there is a qualification regarding who's going to testify. The thing I'm not sure is, why don't they ask this question, that is the witness, before he is inducted as a witness, is he related to one of the principals in the case, or perhaps another witness, before they induct him as a witness? I'm not quite sure why they don't do that, unless their whole game plan is to get the defendant off, because the Sanhedrin is known as a bloody Sanhedrin, because they have blood on their hands if they don't find a way to get the accused off the death penalty. However, they just indirectly kill him by starving him and then giving him barley and water. So I'm not quite sure what the point of that indirect process is since he's still dying. I can understand why you would do that though, because if somebody gets off on a technicality and they're dangerous for other people, you don't want them roaming around. You're quite happy at whatever basis they can be removed from society. But there should be also cases of a city of refuge, etc., which we're going to see for an inadvertent killing where there are certain levels of uh, negligence in a way. It's not quite murder in terms of either premeditation or sinister aggression, but that certainly could have been avoided in some way. So I think we would go with Rav Yehuda Nossi, who's the redactor of the Mishnah and Gemara. Okay, before we start the new Mishnah, do you have any questions so far? Guys, anything that you can think of?
Just repeat the comparison between your Rav Yehuda and the opinion that we go with, just
Okay,
as compared to the other opinion.
okay. So at the end of the Gemara, it says the halacha is decided, meaning the law. So Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, we go with the halacha according to Rav Yossi. And Rav Yossi's case, Kevin, is quite simply that in a capital case, and they say, for example, there are three witnesses, we can see that the invalidation of a witness, because he's a relative or a professional gambler or a sinner, would invalidate the other two because we're trying to get the defendant off the hook from being killed in a capital case by the Sanhedrin. But Rav Yossi said, as far as a monetary case is concerned, if a witness is invalidated and you've got two valid witnesses left, then justice should prevail because it's not fair to the plaintiff either that the defendant might have reversed and hit his car, but why should he get off the hook? Because he should pay the plaintiff the damage he did to his car. He's defending that he didn't do any damage. So according to Rav Yossi, he should pay for it. If you've got a valid amount of witnesses to convict the defendant for the crime and they need to pay damages or monetary fine, it needs to be implemented. In the capital cases, as we understand. So that's Rav Yehuda and Shmuel that says Rav Yossi is where the halacha goes. As far as Rav Nachman said, he said the halacha is in accordance with Rebbe. And Rebbe said, just to summarize, that it doesn't matter if it's a monetary case or a capital case, the disqualification of a single witness invalidates the testimony of the entire group. But under what basis? In a capital case, the witness has to be a warner to the murderer. What do we mean? Is that his participation is that he has to say that the sin you're about to commit is an aveira. It's forbidden in the Torah, and it has the punishment of the death penalty. If he doesn't participate in the warning, he's not even inducted as a witness. As far as a monetary case is concerned, the Beis Din asks him afterwards, because you're not going to warn in a monetary case. Why do we say that? Is yesterday we said you can see somebody running around with a knife against a victim. It's, sometimes somebody just gets jabbed with a knife, but often there's an altercation that takes place and it escalates in violence. And then they can say, hang on, just cool it off for a sec. And the defendant then has to acknowledge the punishment, which is a further problem. But in a monetary case, there is no warning. I mean, how do you know some idiot, as I said to you yesterday, isn't at Norwood Mall and puts the car in reverse and hits a BMW? You don't know. Guy should be in first to drive out, instead he reverses. So you can't give him a warning on stupidity. You can only afterwards come to the Sanhedrin, and when they ask you, were you merely a spectator, you can say, no, I wish to bear witness and testify against the defendant that he smashed the plaintiff's car. Okay, do you get the bottom line? Kev?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going much more
Okay, yeah.
slow, but is this helpful? Is this pace reasonable?
Yes, yeah.
All right. Everybody happy with this case? Yep, just put your hand up. Okay, cool. All in favor say aye. All right, so now that we've done that, let's go to this new Mishnah that we're going to share. Okay. All right. Now, Kevin has taught us, not as in a turtle taught us, but he is going to teach us at the end of this year. Let's have somebody else reading the Mishnah. Who read it last time? Who read it last time? Somebody that generally doesn't share. Brendan, luckily you haven't got your strap, so you can't do it at the moment. Kevin teaches us every day, so it leaves Lance, Arthur, and Gavin. Who would like to read the Mishnah? Guys, don't be shy. Step right up.
I think I did it last time.
Okay, so who wants to read now? Somebody.
Well, Arthur's on the bus, so it's not so easy for him.
Okay,
So
Lance, do you
either
want
I
to
do it or
read,
Gavin will
or
do
do you
it.
want Gavin to
Or-
read? You tell me, Lance.
I can read, it's fine. So, after discussing the consequences of many witnesses being considered part of a single set, the Mishnah now defines a circumstance which separates witnesses to a crime into different sets. If two witnesses observed him from one window committing a crime from which the penalty is death, while two others observed him from another window, and an individual standing in between warned him that the act that he was about to commit was forbidden and punishable by death, as long as some of them saw each other, they are considered one set of witnesses. But if not, they are considered two sets of witnesses. I'm not sure. Okay, therefore, but there were three different groupings. Therefore, since observers did not see each other, who did not see each other are considered separate sets of witnesses, if one set of them was found to be Zomamem, he, the one accused of the crime, and they, the witnesses found to be Zomamem, are executed, while the second set is exempt from any punishment. The accused is executed because the set of witnesses which was not discredited testified that he committed the crime. The witnesses who were found to be Zomamem are also put to death because has been established that they testified falsely.
Okay.
Rabbi Yossi said,
Yeah, continue. I'm listening to you.
Rabbi Yossi says, one can never be executed unless the two witnesses who testify against him both warned him. For it says that by the testimony of two witnesses, Rabbi Yossi understands this verse to mean that every component of the testimony necessary to convict him, including the warning, must come from both witnesses. Since the criminal in our case had not been warned by the two witnesses, but by a third party, he cannot be executed. Consequently, the witnesses found to be Zomamem are also not executed because their testimony could not have convicted the accused. Another teaching that may be derived from this verse, the testimony of two witnesses, that the Sanhedrin should not listen through an interpreter. Rather, they must themselves understand the language spoken by the witness.
Perfect. Perfect. So a couple of concepts I just want to go through is we talked about this before. We used the example in the Gemara of the West Wing and the East Wing, where if they were broken up, that there wasn't visibility between the one group and the other group, then they're seen as two separate sets of witnesses. So there are different opinions as far as that's concerned. The Aruch Laner basically understands this to mean that at least one witness in each group was able to see one of the witnesses in the other group. In other words, all he requires is that the West Wing witness, a group of people, one can witness one of the witnesses in the East Wing, and vice versa. Sorry, one of the witnesses. In other words, it doesn't have to be a vice versa sort of thing. But according to the Rashash, sorry guys, so what I was going to say is the Aruch Laner says that one witness in each group has to see one of the other witnesses in the other group. So it has to be corroborated. So in other words, it doesn't have to be the same witness. So if Lance is in one group and I'm in another, and I say I saw Lance, Lance doesn't have to say he saw me. All he has to say is that somebody in the other group has to say they saw the member of our group. So if there were 2 or 3 people in the West Wing and 2 or 3 people in the East Wing, it's fine that they can corroborate it. Okay. Now, according to the Rashash, it's sufficient for just one member of one group to see one of the witnesses in the other. So what I'm saying is the Aruch Laner is much more stringent. Each group has to have one witness being able to identify a witness in another group from a visionary perspective. As far as the Rashash, only one of the members of the particular group can view the other group. It doesn't have to be reciprocal. Does everybody get that? Okay. So that's the first thing. The other thing of it is we say, look, what happens if it's a case where there's a group and the one group is genuine and the other group is Adim Somavim? So to put it in context, you've got, for example, 3 witnesses in the East Wing. Let's just call it 3 witnesses in the West Wing. And then afterwards, the defendant is sentenced to death, but they haven't carried out the verdict. And a second set of witnesses have contended that the witnesses in the East Wing were with them in a different province at the time that they said to have witnessed the event. Now, in that particular case, why is the defendant put to death? Because in the East Wing, those witnesses were not refuted or repudiated by a second set of witnesses. So they, on the testimony that they provide, they're able to have the defendant executed. And by the same token, because those in the West Wing were never really in the West Wing, because a second set of witnesses said they were with them somewhere else, they are executed for being Adim Zomimim. So it can happen that the accused is actually given the death sentence, and a set of witnesses is also given the death sentence. That's fairly straightforward. Any questions there, guys? So what's the bottom line in terms of concept? Is that Zomimim, conspiring witnesses, are punished for their false testimony, even when the events described in it happen to be true. Because what do we learn in 5a? We learned that the person that they're testifying against might have in fact been a murderer, and he might have been a gangster, and he might have in fact committed this murder. But the set of witnesses might have known this guy is no good, and they never actually viewed the killing itself. But he might have committed the murder, but they know about it. They know about it through community circles, etc. And they're terrified of this guy because he's a psychopath and he's looking to kill them based on the fact that they owe this gangster money. So they're quite happy to use this as an opportune time to have the defendant executed. But why are they given the reciprocal penalty? Because even if the second set of witnesses say, listen, we hear you, we know that person committed the murder. The problem is you were with us in a different province. Therefore, you couldn't have seen it. The reason why we killed those Adim Zomimim, even if the event transpired, is they were executed because they are testifying to a crime they didn't witness and looking to have somebody killed on the basis of their testimony, even if that event happened, and they're causing that person's death. So, that's a factor. Also, you've got to remember that was from 5a and 5b, the Zomimim will not be executed if all of the members of their particular group haven't been proven Zomimim. So in that case, the accused too would not be evaluated as a murderer, and he's not going to be executed. So where does this come about? Is that sometimes what we do is we make them do the testimony in succession to each other within the time lapse of a brief statement in order to be able to save lives of Adam Zommerman. Because if they're seen as one group, then a person isn't executed as the murderer. And if it's seen as a single group because of the way they testify in the time lapse of the court, then one discredited witnesses is going to absolve them of the reciprocal punishment. Do you see why they do it like that? You don't have to agree as long as you understand. Now, one thing to also bear in mind is that it could be a case here that if you take it simply, the Mishnah statement that a second set is exempt seems to be unnecessary because they weren't discredited. It's obvious. So the Numukai Yosef says that, look, the Mishnah implies that the second pair too were eventually discredited by Hazamah. He says you can read more into it. But if the second set are made to be Eidim Zomamim, but the accused has already been executed, they are exempt from the punishment by the court. Because this sort of case, according to the Nimukei Yosef, could occur. If one set were Eidim Zomamim, it's very possible that the other set could have also been. We only learned it after the facts of the execution when the first set was caught, but the second set wasn't, and they executed the defendant, and other witnesses hear about it, and they say it's too late, you don't get the reciprocal penalty. The last point of the Mishnah is Rav Yossi's statement. He's basically said one can never be executed unless the two witnesses who testify against the accused both warned him, because he takes the pasuk quite literally. He says, by the testimony of two witnesses or three witnesses shall the matter be established. And there was also the thing is by the testimony of two witnesses or three witnesses shall the man be put to death. So every component of the testimony necessary to convict him, including the warning, has to come from both those witnesses. Okay? And where's that from? Devarim chapter 17, verse 6. So, in other words, it's an instruction that both witnesses have to be involved in the warning process, because the criminal in our case had not been warned by two witnesses, by a third party, can't be executed. But that's just Rav Yossi's opinion. It's not generally the opinion. If the witnesses are found to be conspiring, they're also not executed because their testimony could not have affected the accused. So what it's saying is as follows, is that firstly, if there was a second set of witnesses, that they, on the basis of their testimony, if they weren't involved in the warning process, then they can't execute the defendant, and therefore they're not executed as a reciprocal penalty. If they're two genuine witnesses, they have to be involved with the warning process in order to make it incumbent upon us to have that as a valid warning, and the defendant has to acknowledge it and commit the crime anyway, and therefore it's pretty unlikely for it to happen. There was another teaching that could be derived from the verse, is that the Sanhedrin should not listen through an interpreter. They must themselves understand the language spoken by the witnesses. Okay, so that's just a little bit more detail. Now, I just want to go through the Gemara with you guys a second. Is basically the Gemara is taught that a group of witnesses don't become one set unless they see each other. So they can either see each other, at which, according to the more lenient opinion, it suffices that one witness can see one of the other witnesses in the other group. That's according to the Rishash. Arach Naer says each witness in each group has to be able to see one of the other witnesses. And what we are saying is here, the same holds true for a single witness who do not see each other. So in other words, what you're saying is, say there's not two groups of witnesses, but there's only two people. How do we know that they have to see each other in order to be joined together as a set of witnesses? If each one comes with their statement, but maybe they were blocked by a partition where the one was in the west wing and one was in the east wing, that's not enough to come together as a single set in order to convict the accused. But what you have to bear in mind is that even this case of doing the testimony within one utterance of each other doesn't count in this particular case, because that was meant more for an invalidation process for Adim Zomim. So Rav Zutra Bar Tova said in the name of Rav, where do we know that the testimony of isolated witnesses is invalid? Okay? In other words, there are two witnesses, but they were separated. They each watched it from a different window and didn't see each other. Because if you look at the pasuk, it said, he shall not be executed by the testimony of one witness. So you say, okay, but what does that mean? So I tell you why there's a redundancy. If you look at Devarim chapter 17, verse 6, what it says is by the testimony of two witnesses or three witnesses, the one who deserves to die shall be executed. Now, from there, you know already that if it's under two witnesses, they can't testify. But here you've got two single witnesses that both saw the crime, they just never saw each other. And then the Chumash comes to finish that verse and says, he shall not be executed by the testimony of one witness. So that seems as though it's superfluous and an unnecessary statement. And Rav Zutra Bar Tova said to Rav, no, we have to learn from that he shall not be executed by the testimony of only one witness. And what's meant by one witness? If you literally say one witness, you can infer that from the first part of the pasuk. By the testimony of two witnesses, it's obvious. Shall the person be executed? So because of the redundancy, it's coming to teach you that you don't even have to say the word one witness is insufficient. So what does it mean is one by one? That's the word Ela Ma'ir Echad, meaning the individuals who witness an event in isolation from each other are not joined together. So the verse teaches that the testimony is not sufficient to sentence a person to death because they don't combine to form a set of witnesses. All right, I think that's enough for today. Kevin, do you want to teach us? Because Lance has to be out of there in 5 minutes.
Sorry, I was on mute there. Thank you, Shkach, Damon. So, Parshat Kedoshim, there was an interesting thing here about rebuke, or I'll just read what it says and we'll have a little mini discussion about it. So it says, do not bear of him a sin. So it's talking about, what do we call it? When you rebuke, what's the word in Hebrew you see, Damon?
What, Musa?
Musar, yeah, Musar. Jeez, I couldn't think of the word there. So it says here,
Cousin of Samusa. Okay.
yeah, exactly. But that's Hindu, though. That's not Jewish.
That's true.
So it says here, Rav Kamenetsky said, if somebody is after receiving musar or rebuke, abuses the rebuker, then the musar wasn't sufficient or wasn't satisfactory. So I know we've experienced it. Maybe some people shouldn't give musar because it can come across, it's happened to me in a very arrogant, very judgmental way. You have to be very careful not to chase away the person you're trying to help. You have to do it in a sensitive, practical way, that you're doing it out of concern for them and not because you think you're superior to them, which happens, unfortunately, and that's counterproductive. So if we aren't able to do it in the right way, that the person may take heed of what we're trying to do, then maybe it's not our place. It's a bit of a it could be could be a controversial subject. Rather don't give musar if you don't know how to talk properly to somebody, or if you're not going to be effective, because it's counterproductive.
Okay, that's a good point. And in fact, we learned this in the Chumash when Yaakov said, "My brothers, can you please assist with drawing water?" In other words, he gave Musa. He didn't say, "Listen, you got no derech eretz. There's this young girl. She has to draw water for my camels." He said, "Brothers, let's get involved together. Let's help this woman." So it's the gentleness. It's not what you say; it's how you say it. So that delivery is perfect. And also, Musa, sometimes your timing, you got to pick your timing. If somebody, it says, do not rebuke a person when they're dead or before them, or when they're ill-tempered, meaning if they're in the middle of a heated situation, just choose your timing before you get shot as the messenger. However, sometimes you have to break that person's mental state before they commit a homicide, as in the case that we're learning now about a murderer. You have to say, hang on, you kill this person, you're going to end up getting executed. Do you know that? Please just stop. Sometimes you have to do it, but it's also the way you do it. Anyway, when somebody's got a knife, I think I'd keep like a 4 feet distance before I warn them not to kill somebody else, just for self-preservation. But that's me. All right, guys. I hope the pace today is better. We're going to look at the pacing that's good for all of you. I'm going to do my best. It's an experiment. We just need to get to Dafa Shavua. Lance, thank you. I know you have to lock up. Kevin, you got to teach. Thanks, all of you, and I appreciate the feedback. If you have any questions, just put on the group.
Cheers.
I'll answer it with pleasure. But all right, be well. Cheers.
Yes,